Hi guys. So today's chit chat video is about old delves. So we have Gabby here today. And I've just gotten into this sort of a rabbit hole of going through all the old delves and looking up photos of them, including things like breakaways, which were one of my dream sculpts at one point in time, as well as L's. I don't really search for leashes. Anyway, about leashes, we'll get into the pronunciation later, but yeah, I don't really search for Gabby's sculpt because I already have Gabby. And looking at the photos of like kind of 2010 or even earlier actually, I think around 2010 photos of old delves, CP delves, reminded me of how I felt when I first got into the hobby and like before I first got Gabby, and also when I got Gabby in the end. I don't know how to describe this if you weren't in the hobby during this time. It probably doesn't really make sense to you. Back in the days, not to make me sound old, but back in the days, delves were really, really popular and I wanted so many of them. And I used to look up like other owners' photos of their dolls and like really just admire them. And that was also kind of how I got a lot of dolls on my wish list. Like I had a lot of delves on my wish list, and like they just felt like, you know, so cool, but also kind of unattainable. Because I was back in those days I was like 14. I was 14. I was like 15 when I first got Gabby. So, in about 14 when I first discovered BJDs, except I think in the local community we used to call them dolfies, because of books, super dolfies. Yeah, so yeah, it just feels all kinds of nostalgic. I find it hard to explain it to you, and I don't really want to take photos from owners without their permission, so I might link a few in the description. But anyway, the thing is, looking at the photos again now in 2021 actually, but I mean I was looking at the photos in 2020, but at the end of 2020, but now I'm recording this as 2021. Looking at them, I still get the same sense of nostalgia, and I still feel like, oh my gosh, these breakaways are so cool, these L's are so cool. I really want to have them, which is very funny because I have Gabby, who is of a similar aesthetic. Like I always thought L's, leashes, and breakaways have a lot in common. Like definitely there are different sculpts. There's differences between their nose, their mouths, but they are pretty similar. So it's quite funny how looking at old photos immediately brought me down this thought process of like, oh, now I really want to own a 2005 breakaway, or like how do I find a 2005 breakaway nowadays? You know, it's like the kind of thought processes that I had as a kid, not as a kid, but like as a teenager. And like back then it made sense because I was basically broke and unable to buy any of the dolls, even if they ever come up for like new releases. But now I do have a bit more money that I set aside for my doll hobby. But I mean, it's hard to find dolls on the marketplace nowadays, so yeah. But the funny thing is, when I actually sat down properly to think about it, I'm not sure I actually want to own more dolls. If you've watched my declutter video, you know that I try to keep my doll collection to only dolls that spark joy, and I don't think at this point when I have like 10 dolls, I can't really remember, but it's around there, that I want to have more dolls, and I also don't really have the space for them. So I think it's really just this idea where my brain wants short-term gratification, where it's like, oh, you gotta own this new doll, or you gotta own, in this case, an old doll, a breakaway. But like, my brain is basically like, oh, you should get something new, rather than, you know, appreciate the things that you do have, which, like I said, that's why I have Gabby out now, and like, I'm not like touching his hands, which is something that I would usually do. I always like to do this. That's just because I'm trying to stay out of frame of the camera, and that's why I'm trying to pick like lint off his socks. But like, normally I'll be like holding him, and like, yeah, so it's really easy to get caught up in like the cycle of thinking, oh, I want to get new things, new dolls, new clothes. But I actually already, having been in the hobby for so long, I do have like dolls that I really enjoy. I just don't really spend that much time on them still. So yeah, so after having that like bunch of thought processes, I did take a few photos of Gabby. It's on my Instagram. They're not great photos, but back in the days when I first got the doll, when I first got Gabby, I always just took photos everywhere. And I think now that I've been in the hobby for longer, there's a bit more of a like expectation I have of myself that I should take better photos, which, I mean, that may or may not really be the case. It doesn't really matter. The point is that like having that kind of thinking stops me from wanting to actually take photos whenever I feel like it, just because I feel like I need to have enough time to take the photos nicely. I need to have enough time to adjust the doll, adjust their hair, their wigs, the background, make sure nothing's looking terrible. And like yeah, I mean, the photos are better when I do this. You know, there's a lot of effort that goes into doing this kind of photos, but like, and I'm not even anywhere near the crazy amount of efforts because I just can't bring myself to do it. But like, there's also something nice about just like taking your dolls out and like snapping a photo here and there. Just because you really enjoy your doll and you just want to take photos of them, like, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think I've forgotten about that kind of attitude along the way, or like just, you know, in general. So yeah, I think for nostalgia's sake, I am gonna put up a few photos of Gabby just to show you in actuality how not great the photos are. But I mean, when I look back at the photos even now, I can feel like I was just so excited to, you know, get to play with him, get to try on some new clothes. Or like, in a lot of cases he didn't have new clothes because I didn't have the money to buy new clothes for him. So I would sew new things for him, and my sewing skills were not great then, and they're still not great now. But I didn't really care because I just wanted him to have like more clothes than what I could afford. So I DIY'd a lot of stuff. Yeah, and I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with doing that, and I just need to remind myself that there's no need to be so particular about enjoying my dolls in a certain way. Yeah. I've been watching a lot of Lolita videos, Lovely Lore and Scarfing Scarves. So they talked a lot about a lot of new Lolitas having a baby Lita face. which is basically when, like, you know, their coordinates or their dresses are not necessarily that well put together, maybe because they don't have all the, like, pieces, all the blouse, accessories, and so on. And, like, I think there's something similar to that in the doll hobby. I don't think we have a good term for it. I think we used to just call this, like, noobs, which is not a very nice term, but, like, I mean, I was a noob once, so, yeah, but, like, there's nothing wrong with that kind of, like, if anything, I feel like the enthusiasm that newbies have is really infectious, and it's, like, really nice, and, yeah, sometimes, I mean, naturally because, well, not naturally, but in most cases, because people are new to the hobby, to everything, things may not turn out so well put together. Of course, there are exceptions. There are people who take great photos even when their dolls are new. And nowadays, with like full sets and things like that, it's easier to. I mean, it's easier if you have the money to just like put together a doll that's like well coordinated and like, you know, looking great and so on. But like, yeah, sometimes I miss this like a bit more of a just do it yourself. I can't afford any of these things right now, but I still have time. I think one difference is, yeah, as a teenager, I had a lot of time compared to now as an adult who's working. But I don't really think there's a point to this. The circumstances that I have has changed a lot from when I first got into the hobby than where I am now, in my late 20s. Yeah, I've been around for a while. So, yeah, the second part of today's chit-chat, I got into a bit of a long ramble earlier about Delfs. I don't think there was a point to it. I just wanted to share some of the thoughts that I've been having. I don't think there's really a conclusion per se. You know, it's a bit of everything. Like you can do a bit of the stuff that I can do a bit of the stuff that I've been doing now, which is try to get nice photos. But I can also, you know, bring back the beginner's attitude. Yeah, so there's like really nothing wrong with doing either of that. And in fact, doing both, yeah, I think doing both might be the more reasonable thing to do, you know, like the whole life is in moderation and all that. Anyway, yeah, the second part, like I said, I wanted to talk a bit about some of the doll names that I've been pronouncing wrongly. So I was spurred on by this whole deep dive into Delfs that I decided to go through Luts website. Okay, so I'm hesitating in the pronunciation because I finally figured out how it's supposed to be pronounced, but for super long, for like basically the whole time I've been in the hobby, I've pronounced Luts as, I'm just gonna put it on the screen. I've pronounced it as like Luts Dolls, or maybe it's Luts Doll. I can't remember whether there's an S, but somebody has once told me that it's actually meant to be pronounced as Loots, like L-O-O-T, like Loots, but I didn't really care, and I continued pronouncing it as Luts. But when I went to look up the Korean version of their website, it's actually pronounced, my Korean pronunciation is not great, but it's basically Roochi. So it's like R-O-O-C-H-E-U. Yeah, but basically I think in English it would translate to Lutz. So it's actually Lutz doll. And yeah. So that's one thing I've been pronouncing wrongly. And I decided to search up how to pronounce his sculpt name, Gabby's sculpt name. I always used to say Lishe. Some people say Lishi. It was just a very difficult name to figure out how to pronounce. And I'm gonna put it up on screen, and I'll find the Google Translate version of it, but I believe it's pronounced Li Shui.
Li
Yeah, so I have no idea what I'm going to continue pronouncing his sculpt name as. It's very difficult for me to pronounce Rishui. But I'm definitely going to try and correct Luts Delf, because that's easier. So there are some other funny pronunciations, like, I mean, this is a case of like Korean pronunciation that like doesn't quite show up when you see the English spelling of the word. But like, for example, there are like some stupid ones, silly ones, like L is spelled E-L, and I don't know why I used to pronounce it as E-L. I used to call that sculpt E-L, don't ask me why. I did figure out that it's called L afterwards. But yeah, so that's another one that I have pronounced wrongly. And when I was searching through the Luts page, there's another sculpt, YDER, which I used to pronounce Yeder, adding extra E behind the Y for no reason. I realized it's actually pronounced Idol in Korean. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, while I was searching the page, I found like 2 other dolls that like I didn't really expect what their names to be like in Korean. So I'm gonna put them on screen. So Delf Moon is how he was called in English, and apparently in Korean he's called Dal, which I mean translates to moon. It literally translates to moon. But you know, if they've taken a transliteration, like a direct like how it sounds, then he wouldn't have been called Moon. And Breakaway, which I've mentioned earlier, was one of my earlier sculpts, and Breakaway is actually called Ital, which makes so much sense because when Fairyland did a re-release of Breakaway, I mean Fairyland did a few releases of Breakaways, but like in the most recent one, I believe, they were basically like Ital bracket equals Breakaway close bracket. So yeah, I guess that's where it came from, because in Korean he was always just known as Ital, I suppose, but in English he was known as Breakaway. So there's 2 other names that I'm aware that I've not really pronounced correctly. One is Ipo House. I pronounce it Ipo because, you know, I as in like the letter I. But the Korean reading of it is actually Ipo House. E standing for leaf, I believe. So, I mean, like, that's debatable, but like, you basically pronounce the I as E-E, so it's like Ipo House. And yeah, and this one's kind of embarrassing, but like, Volks Resner, I'm not sure whether that's how you pronounce it, but I've always read his name wrongly, so I didn't realize this. The I came before the S. I always thought he was Resner. Yeah, just let that sink in for a moment. I always thought he was Resner, which would be a hilarious name, but no, he's Resner, I think. Yeah, so those are some of the doll names that I've been pronouncing wrongly, and like, I think that's about all I want to say for today. So like, today is kind of a long chit chat. I hope the background noises are not too loud. And yeah, let me know what you think about old dolls, and whether there are particular sculpts that are particularly nostalgic for you. So that's all we have for today. That's all we have for today. Thanks for watching.